Our next speaker is David Braund, Emeritus Professor at the University of Exeter, a well-known expert in the Greeks of the Black Sea, having spent a long time in Russia and Georgia. He is a Roman historiographer whose works span widely from Roman Britain on the duller end of the scale, up to the next book that we eagerly await is on Amazons and their role in Greek culture. And it's a great pleasure to welcome him today to speak on running with horses at the Olympics. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. Right. Hang on a minute. Sorry about this. We seem to have a slight technical hitch. No doubt. Okay, fine. Right. As Robert was explaining, most of my work, certainly in recent decades, has been concerned with the Black Sea region, the Greeks there, and actually the various other peoples there and processes of connectivity in the Black Sea region. Today, I'm going to talk about sport, or an aspect of sport in that context, as one of the many ways in which the Black Sea region, or cities, peoples within the region, connect with Greek culture more generally, way outside the Black Sea region, in this case, particularly Olympia. My focus is going to be the rather strange race known as Kalpe. It tends to be translated as trotting race in English. I'm not sure that's terribly helpful, but I'll give you that. In modern Greek, I notice kalpazo, I gallop, has become extremely popular, particularly I noticed during the coronavirus problems, when we were always told that the coronavirus is kalpazoing, kalpazi στην Ελλάδα, στην Αθήνα, κάπου, kapithaname oli kada. Okay, so we heard all that about galloping. So maybe we should think about Kalpe as galloping. The difficulty with Kalpe is we have little more than an outline of what actually was involved. Essentially, it seems to have been a two-stage race where the rider sets off on horseback, on a mare, specifically a female horse, and along the way jumps off and continues the race running with the horse, holding the horse's bridle. Now, there's no indication I could see in anything we have on this that he has to ride at trotting speed for the first half. So I guess that's where the galloping comes in. And presumably after he's jumped off, keeping hold of the bridle and continuing, he's going at a slower pace. So it must have been a rather, almost a deflating experience to see the gallop going on and then the rather quieter trot. I'm not sure. Whatever the case, the ancient Greeks decided at Olympia anyway that it perhaps didn't work all that well. Pausanias tells us, and we rely a lot on Pausanias for the little we know about Kalpe. Pausanias tells us in book 5, chapter 9, section 2, if you want a reference. Pausanias tells us that the Kalpe was introduced in the 71st Olympiad and was basically thrown out in the 84th. So it's essentially a phenomenon of the 5th century, if my maths stands up at all, which it may not. It's thrown out in the 84th Olympiad for reasons we are not told. As I suggested, maybe because of its rather slightly dreary end. It's thrown out together with the mule cart race, which again doesn't sound wildly exciting. And it was pointed out in Elis that there was a general problem about the way the mule was perceived and received in Elis. So mules weren't really on. So this story, this reality, becomes a matter of change in what constitutes the Olympic Games. A discussion that's still going on, isn't it? I mean, every time we have the Olympics, oh, somebody else wants to be in. I think I heard it seriously suggested that Tiddlywinks might be included, which is a strange British game played by children. And we're going to have maybe golf and all kinds of other things. So change in the Olympics is something which has actually since antiquity been built in. But what we're seldom told is anything about the reasons for these changes. In the case of Kalpe, Kalpe is something which is looked upon rather fondly, it seems, by Pausanias and also by Plutarch. The Greeks of the 2nd century AD or so liked to ponder the greatness of the past, perhaps, and had a certain sadness about such changes when something was thrown out. But of course, things had to be thrown out if things were going to be brought in, certainly in terms of the ancient Olympic festivals. Now, what's all that got to do with the Black Sea? Essentially, it's got to do with the Black Sea because in the Black Sea, we have a town and a river called Kalpe, famously described by Xenophon in his Anabasis, and of some significance in the ancient world. So, okay, now Achilles is the central figure in making these connections. Achilles, whom we routinely see as a demonic warrior on foot, more or less invincible, a killing machine. He's going to go around the battlefield killing pretty much everybody. And here we have him killing the Amazon queen, Penthesilea, shortly after the events of the Iliad, when the Amazons turn up. Penthesilea has her moments of success on the battlefield, but is soon killed by Achilles on foot. And it's easy to think of Achilles as somebody on foot. After all, he's swift-footed, isn't he? Podokis, very much his epithet. However, he also is a considerable aristocrat. He's also from northern Greece, so that we might tend to think about horses. And in particular, we know, again, thanks to Homer, about his very special horses, on his chariot at least, Xanthus and Balios, who are not only mentioned as his horses, but are given a considerable amount of attention, really. In book 19, they're made to talk and have a bit of an argument with Achilles. In that context, we're given their mother's name, a famous mother called Podarge, a mare, incidentally. Therefore, we may remember a mare was specifically, a female horse was specifically the steed for the Kalpe. And she's a harpy, in fact, as we're told in book 16, who has produced these remarkable horses with a father who was the west wind. So again, speed is everything for Achilles. So taking all that together, no surprise that we also find him on horseback. And here is a much less commonly viewed version of the battle, the duel, as it's often said, it's a very short duel, between Achilles and Penthesilea. Amazons like horses, Achilles likes horses, they fight on horseback on this vase from Germany now. So, horses. Now, Achilles is a major figure in the world of the Black Sea, something which I think often gets left out of the story. From very early on, we're told that when Achilles dies, ultimately killed by Paris at Troy, his body is taken by his mother Thetis and deposited by the sea goddess on the only island in the Black Sea, which you see before you, the island of Levki, the White Island. And indeed, it looks white from the side. I haven't got a good picture. I managed to see it once, and it is very white. And indeed, it's the only island, really significant island in the Black Sea, about 1 kilometer by kilometer. It's been very much in the news in the context of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict and the various insults exchanged between the two. The fact is that neither side will be able to hold it because there's basically nowhere to hide there, and anybody who's foolish enough to sit there is going to be killed very quickly. He's important there. He's important all around the Black Sea, especially across the north coast. We have towns called Achilleon. We have Myrmikion for the Myrmidon connection. And we know particularly that in the northwestern Black Sea beyond Leucate, Achilles was a major figure of interest, so much so that Diochrysostom around AD 100, another of these, as it were, Roman Greeks, he gives the whole orations, 36th oration indeed, to Achilles and the love of Achilles at Olbia on the northwest coast. So here we are in the Black Sea, northwest coast. Olbia is located more or less where the A of modern Edessa is. Modern Edessa did not exist in antiquity. It was created by Catherine the Great. Right across that northern area, in particular, we have Achilles, and on the southern coast, just more or less to the west of Zonguldak, which in the ancient world is Heraclea Pontica, a great city. To the west of Heraclea Pontica is the Bithynian town, Greek Bithynian town of Kalpe. Now, a bit of Hollywood here. Across, you probably guessed that, across this whole region, the Trojan myth has great significance. But even more direct significance, arguably, is the Argonautic myth as popularized here in the 60s, or the ancient version, which is a bit less dramatic, perhaps, of a slightly scrawny Jason getting the golden fleece with the help of the supernatural Athena. To this day, along these coasts, the Argonautic myth, it remains of considerable significance. This is a statue from Batumi in Georgia, just across the border from Turkey, which shows Medea, rather ugly Medea, I have to say. She should have been very beautiful, holding the golden fleece, which he's just helped Jason steal from her father. It's a rather complicated statue, I have to say. But what it does is, in this case, quite overtly, specifically explained by Georgian government, what it does is show the connectivity between Georgia and, as it were, Greek and more broadly European tradition. That's why they put up the statue. And the ancient cities of this region effectively do the same thing. They're forever foregrounding, stressing connections with key Greek myths. And the Argonautic myth is as important and possibly earlier than the Homeric myths that we have. It's mentioned, taken for granted in Homer. Now, let's see. Okay. The things still work from here. You can read it anyway. Essentially, what we have here is a learned note, a commentator who we have no name for, who produced a remarkable array of important information in his snippets, commentating on Apollonius Rhodius's famous Argonautica, the earliest of the full Argonautic poems that we have, written under Ptolemy Philadelphus, early 3rd century BC. And he tells us, the commentator, noting that the poem gets us to Kalpe, he suddenly throws in the information that here on the banks of the river, the wide banks of the river, was the racecourse of Achilles. Doesn't say what racecourse, doesn't say what was raced, but this is Kalpe, and this is located at Kalpe. And what I'm suggesting here is very much that we put those two together and we have Kalpe claiming, and having it claimed for itself, that it is named after the athletic activities of Achilles, performing or training for this particular kind of half-mounted, half-running race, such as we know from the Olympics and other contexts. The source, Dionysius the Olbian, is a matter of some mystery. This is all we know about him. People normally think of him as Hellenistic, which is usually a safe bet, and it is probably right. He's usually taken to come from Olbia, where Achilles was certainly important. But it's unlikely that he does, because the city of Olbia was not known as Olbia outside its own walls. It was eager to call itself Olbia or Olbiopolis. But the world in general had rather too many Olbias. There are at least half a dozen of them around the Mediterranean. And Olbia sat very close to the remarkable river Dnieper, the Borysthenes. And for that reason, the city was known as Borysthenes among Greeks in general, and its people were known as Borysthenites. Hence, for example, the Cynic philosopher Bion of Borysthenes. He's not called Bion of Olbia, Bion of Borysthenes. This is an Olbian who doesn't come from the North Black Sea, most likely. He probably comes much more locally from the region of Olbia, the town of Olbia, that got swallowed up into the big conurbations of Nicomedia and Nicaea on the eastern side of the Hellespont, not very far from Kalpe. What we seem to have here is an author whose connections, whose literary ideological context are to be put with a whole swathe of writers who tend to be rather neglected now. I guess the best known is probably Memnon of Heraclea Pontica, the historian who has his own tradition, people like Nymphis, who again tends to be forgotten. Important geographical, mythical writers like the man we call Pseudo-Skymnus, who wrote for the king of Bithynia around 100 BC. There's a Demosthenes of Bithynia who wrote a work which is mostly lost. We've got half a dozen fragments, which are giving a mythical context to the places of the Bithynian coast. So what we actually have here, it seems, is a effectively Bithynian tradition about Kalpe and its connection with this strange sporting event, which had its moment in the sun in the 5th century BC. It lasted from the 71st to the 84th Olympiad, as I said, so it had some life, but didn't persist beyond that, and was something which, as I said, sort of went out of fashion, it seems, but at the same time, there seems to be no difficulty among Greeks in understanding what it is and what it was. so that we have something, I think, which really helps us. Oh, it doesn't help us, sorry. Okay, mysteriously bad. That'll do. We have something which helps us, I think, connect the goings on, if you like, in the Black Sea, the activities of Achilles there as part of a broader sense of wanting mythically to connect with the Greek world at large. The athletic activities around the Black Sea, we were going to hear something about that later on, in my view, don't actually differ greatly from the athletic activities elsewhere. And it's, I think, perhaps worth remembering that. So a story of origin, a story which is in a sense a story of colonial settlement and the creation of what we now unfashionably call local identity. That's what it is. Achilles is our man, said the people of Kalpe, as did the people of so many other places around this region, from the Hellespont right over to the Sea of Azov and its Achillean. I think at that point I'll stop, and I'm partly aware that lunch is beckoning. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Questions from the audience?
One question: you seem to downplay the attraction this Kalpe. I'm not sure if we can say that, because it depends very much on what is actually at stake. I mean, in Dutch, in Holland, we like speed skating about 10 kilometers, which other people compare to growing of grass. So it's a matter of perception. But I was wondering, there are other similar events like the Apobates in Athens. Do you have any idea how this may compare to the whole set of running alongside horses? Because I think there are.
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right, of course, that these are subjective judgments. I'm sure there were people who longed to go and see Kalpe, and there's something about horse racing which clearly has a major appeal to people. I confess I'm neither interested in horse racing personally or in human racing. It seems to be completely ridiculous, but nevertheless, people want to do it. So yes, these things are very subjective. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right also to refer to the Apobatai, because that's exactly what Pausanias does. He kind of drifts from talking about Kalpe to the activities of the Apobatai, but he doesn't actually connect them in any way. What I was hoping he would say was that the Apobatai, as it were, made the Kalpe look a bit less attractive. One wonders perhaps if that's what's going on. But I'm reluctant to take that step because Pausanias doesn't,
What do they getting their information from? These 2nd century AD writers, 5th century BC?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It gives me an excuse to mention the attempt of Julius Pollux, again, in that sort of swim, 2nd century AD Greek, who makes a complete mess of his very brief mention of Kalpe. And he seems to have somehow melded it with the mule cart. And so he has them running about with mules. And I think he's done that because both things were cancelled, as it were, at the same time at the 84th Olympiad. Now, that starts to give us some sort of sense of what's available to them. But really, I suspect there's a whole mass of earlier texts, Hellenistic and later, which were dealing with these sorts of questions. It's exactly the sort of thing that floated their boat, I think.
Any further questions? Thank you, Professor Braund.
Thank you.